Welcome back to the deep dive. Today we are attempting something a little ambitious, maybe even a little reckless.
I think reckless is the right word.
Yeah.
Usually we tackle a subject, we can kind of map out the boundaries.
Yeah.
With this one, the map just keeps unfolding. There's no edge.
We are talking about Gottfried Wilhelm Leibniz, and I want to set the stakes right at the top. If you've ever used a computer, you are, in a very real way, running Leibniz's logic. If you've ever taken a calculus class, you are speaking his language. And if you've ever found yourself late at night wondering why a good, all-powerful God would allow bad things to happen, you are wrestling with a problem that Leibniz dedicated years of his life to solving.
He's been called the last universal genius. And you hear a title like that and you think, okay, it's a bit of hyperbole, right? It's a nice poetic label.
Yeah, sounds good on a book cover.
Exactly.
Right.
But then you actually get into the sources. You look at the sheer volume of his work, and it's not just in one field. That's the key. We have his biographies detailing his life in what was then the Holy Roman Empire, Saxony, Hanover.
And it's not like he just wrote a few big, definitive books. A lot of his genius is scattered.
It's completely fragmented. We're working from something like 15,000 letters. 15,000.
And who is he writing to?
Everyone. Literally everyone. He's writing to queens, to dukes, to philosophers like Spinoza, to Jesuit missionaries deep in China. And in these letters, he's dropping bombshell ideas about physics, about logic, about theology.
So it's a treasure hunt.
It's a massive treasure hunt. Alongside his formal philosophical works, like the Theodicy or the Monadology, you have these thousands of scraps of paper, mathematical notes, diplomatic memos. It's terrifying, really, the scope of it.
Terrifying how?
Because we live in an age of specialization. You're a physicist, or you're a historian, or you're a coder. You can't be all three. The body of knowledge is just too vast.
Right.
But Leibniz lived just before that explosion. He was a master of mathematics, philosophy, law, history, engineering, geology, library science, and he was doing it all at a world-class level, all at the same time.
And that's our mission for this deep dive. How did one human brain manage all of that? How did he anticipate computers 3 centuries early, invent calculus, try to scheme his way to European peace, and explain the very fabric of the universe, while also holding down a day job as a librarian and a courtier?
And maybe the biggest question, why does a man who contributed so much die almost completely alone, unmourned, and buried in an unmarked grave?
It's a paradox. So let's start at the beginning. We have to understand the world that made him before we can understand the worlds he made. Section 1, the child prodigy and the chip on his shoulder.
Okay, so you have to picture the time and place. He's born in Leipzig in 1646.
And this is not a good time to be born in the German-speaking lands.
It's maybe the worst possible time. The 30 Years' War is just sputtering to an end. This was a conflict that, it wasn't just a war, it was a cataclysm. It completely devastated Central Europe.
We're talking about massive population loss, right?
Colossal. In some German states, the population dropped by over 50%. The economy was in ruins. Entire cities were burned to the ground. There was famine, plague. It was a landscape of trauma. And Leibniz is born right into the rubble of that world.
So his world is one of chaos, but his family life is academic. His father was a professor of moral philosophy at the University of Leipzig.
He was. So there's this intellectual foundation there. But then tragedy strikes. His father dies when Leibniz is only 6 years old.
Which is a huge blow for any child.
A huge blow. But it leads directly to the defining event of his entire life. Because with his father gone, Leibniz inherits access to his private library.
And a library in the 17th century wasn't like a public library today. This was a treasure chest.
It was everything. And the formal schooling at the time was incredibly rigid. It was what they called a small canon. You learned some Latin grammar, read a few approved classical authors, and that was it. It was very narrow, very controlled.
But the library was uncontrolled. It was the Wild West of ideas.
Precisely. After some initial hesitation, his family just let him loose in there. And you have to picture this. A 7, 8-year-old boy surrounded by these massive leather-bound tomes. He's pulling down advanced Latin philosophy, Greek histories, books on theology that university students would struggle with.
And he's teaching himself.
He's teaching himself Latin this is incredible, by looking at the woodcut illustrations in a history book by the Roman author Livy and matching the pictures to the captions. He's reverse engineering the language from context.
That's not normal.
It's profoundly not normal. By the time he's 12 years old, he's not just proficient in Latin, he's composing poetry in it.
There's that story about the school event, isn't there?
The famous one. He's 13. A student was supposed to deliver a poem in Latin for some school festival, and couldn't do it. Leibniz's teacher asks if he can maybe whip something up. Leibniz goes away, and in a single morning composes 300 hexameters of flawless classical Latin verse.
Okay, that's just showing off.
Oh, absolutely. There's a confidence there, an intellectual swagger that never leaves him. He knows he's the smartest guy in any room he walks into.
And this just accelerates, right? He goes to university at an absurdly young age.
He enrolls at his father's university, the University of Leipzig, when he's just 14 years old.
14. I think I was trying to figure out how to ride a bike without training wheels at 14.
And he's not just there to, take up space. He burns through the curriculum. He gets his bachelor's in philosophy by 1662, his master's a year later, and then finishes his law degree by 1665. He's not even 20 years old yet.
So he's on the fast track. Everything's going perfectly.
Yeah.
But then he hits a wall.
The first major rejection of his life, and I think it shapes him profoundly. In 1666, he's 19, maybe 20, and he applies for his doctorate in law. He's written his dissertation, he's ready, and the faculty at Leipzig turn him down.
Why? Was the work not good enough?
The work was brilliant. The official reason they gave was his relative youth.
So you're too young.
Which was basically academic code for, we don't like you, kid. It was pure professional jealousy. The dean's wife was apparently feuding with Leibniz's family, and the older professors just couldn't stomach the idea of this teenager becoming their equal. It was petty university politics.
And for a mind like Leibniz, who operates on pure logic and merit, that must have been infuriating.
Infuriating is an understatement. And this is where you see that chip on his shoulder form. He could have waited. He could have hung around for another year, but he didn't. He was so disgusted that he packed his bags and left Leipzig, his hometown, forever. He never went back.
He holds a grudge.
A serious grudge. And he immediately proves them wrong. He takes his thesis down the road to the University of Altdorf, submits it, and they're so blown away they award him his doctorate in a matter of months.
Vindication.
Total vindication.
Right.
And here's the fork in the road. The University of Altdorf immediately offers him a job, a professorship. Stay here, they say. You're brilliant. Join the faculty. Have a safe, stable academic career.
The ivory tower. The dream for most scholars.
And Leibniz says no. He turns them down flat. He later wrote that his thoughts were turned in an entirely different direction. This rejection from Leipzig soured him on pure academia. He decided he didn't just want to study the world from a distance. He wanted to be in it. He wanted to shape events.
He wanted power, or at least influence.
He wanted to be a man of affairs, which leads to this absolutely hilarious first attempt to get a job, the alchemist hustle.
I love this story. So he needs a job, he's got his new doctorate, and he ends up in Nuremberg.
Right. And he finds out there's a secretive society of alchemists operating there. Wealthy patrons trying to discover the philosopher's stone, turn lead into gold, all that stuff.
A combination of mystical belief and early chemistry.
Exactly.
Okay.
And they needed a secretary, a paid position to manage their affairs and research. Now, does Leibniz know anything about alchemy?
I'm guessing 0.
Less than 0. He thinks it's complete nonsense. But thanks to his father's library, he's read all the old alchemical texts. He knows the jargon. He knows the buzzwords.
So he can talk the talk.
He decides to write them what is essentially the most impressive-sounding, completely meaningless cover letter in history. It's just a word salad of the most obscure, convoluted alchemical terms he can find.
He's basically bluffing his way in.
It's the ultimate fake it till you make it. He presents himself as this deeply learned master of the secret arts. And the alchemists, who are probably just as confused as anyone, they read this letter and they're floored. They think, my God, this man must be a genius. We don't understand a word of it.
So they hire?
They hire him on the spot. And it's just this perfect little story that shows his incredible confidence and his ability to master the language of any system, whether it's real or not. And that confidence lands him his first real, serious job in the service of the Elector of Mainz.
And this is where he goes from being a brilliant academic to a player on the world stage. Section 2, the diplomat and the Egyptian plan.
Right, so he's now working for a major political figure. And you have to remember the geopolitical context. The Holy Roman Empire, these German states, are weak and fragmented after the war.
And their neighbor is not weak.
Their neighbor is the global superpower. France, under King Louis XIV, the Sun King. Louis has the biggest, best-funded army in Europe, and he has ambitions. He's looking east at the German lands and the wealthy Dutch Republic, and he's thinking of expansion.
So everyone in Germany is terrified of a French invasion.
They are. And Leibniz, who is still in his 20s, mind you, decides he's going to solve this problem. He comes up with one of the most audacious foreign policy proposals in history.
He's not going to suggest a treaty, is he? That's too simple for him.
No, no. He proposes a grand distraction, a geopolitical bank shot. He writes a detailed memorandum that becomes known as the Egyptian Plan.
He wants to get France interested in Egypt. Why Egypt?
Because he frames it as the key to world power. He essentially writes to the French court and says, look, Your Majesty, why are you getting bogged down fighting these pointless wars in the muddy fields of Holland? It's expensive. It's a slog. The real prize isn't in Europe. It's in the East.
The trade with the Indies.
Exactly. The Dutch control the incredibly lucrative spice trade, and that's the source of their wealth. Leibniz argues that if France were to conquer Egypt, they could build a canal at Suez.
He proposed a Suez Canal in the 1670s.
He did. He said, if you do that, you cut out the long, dangerous trip around Africa, you bankrupt the Dutch, you control the flow of wealth from Asia to Europe, and you become the undisputed master of the world. And as a bonus, it's a holy war against the Ottoman Empire, so the Pope will love it.
It's a brilliant pitch, but of course he doesn't actually care about any of that.
Not in the slightest. The real goal is to get the giant French army out of his backyard. If they're off fighting in the deserts of North Africa, they can't be burning German cities. It's a strategy of containment dressed up as a glorious crusade.
It's incredibly clever, so what happens?
The Elector of Mainz thinks it's brilliant and sends Leibniz himself to Paris in 1672 to try and pitch the plan to the French king.
Does he get a meeting with Louis XIV?
He doesn't get that far. The plan gets kicked around the French foreign ministry, but before it can gain any real traction, the political situation changes. Louis decides to invade the Netherlands anyway. The Franco-Dutch War breaks out, and the Egyptian plan is shelved.
So it was a failure.
As a diplomatic mission, yes, it failed. But there is this incredible, almost absurd historical footnote.
Oh, I know this one. Napoleon.
Napoleon. Over a century later, in 1798, Napoleon Bonaparte launches his invasion of Egypt. And when historians were going through the archives, they discovered that Napoleon's foreign minister had found and read a summary of Leibniz's old plan.
So Napoleon actually implemented Leibniz's grand strategy.
He did, unwittingly. Leibniz's idea was sound. He was just 100 years too early. It's a recurring theme in his life. He's operating on a timeline that nobody else is on.
But the trip to Paris wasn't a waste, was it? In fact, it might be the most important failure of his career.
Absolutely. Because while the political mission failed, the intellectual mission was a staggering success. Paris in the 1670s was the undisputed intellectual capital of the world. It was the Silicon Valley of its day. All the greatest minds were there. And Leibniz was about to get a serious upgrade.
Which brings us to Section 3, Paris, physics, and the invention of calculus.
So Leibniz is in Paris, and he manages to get an introduction to the most celebrated scientist in the city, the Dutch physicist Christian Huygens.
And Huygens is a giant. He's famous for his work on optics. He invented the pendulum clock. He discovered Saturn's rings and its moon, Titan. He's the real deal.
He is. And Leibniz, feeling very pleased with himself, goes to meet him. They start talking, and Huygens very quickly realizes that while this young German diplomat is clearly a genius, his mathematics is, well, it's a bit old-fashioned.
He's not up to date on the latest research.
Exactly. He hasn't studied the work of Descartes or Pascal on geometry and probability in any real depth. So Huygens, sort of as a test, gives him a problem to solve. It's a challenge involving the summation of an infinite series.
And Leibniz can't do it.
He can't. He's humbled. But this is the thing about Leibniz. A failure or a challenge doesn't make him quit. It makes him obsess. He realizes there's a huge gap in his knowledge, and he launches himself into what he called a program of self-study.
He basically gives himself a PhD in advanced mathematics in a few months.
In his spare time, while he's still supposed to be doing diplomacy, he devours all the latest mathematical texts. And as he's doing this, he starts to see a problem that's looking at the very edge of what's known. A problem that everyone is struggling with.
The problem of change.
The problem of continuous change. Let's break this down because the word calculus makes everyone's eyes glaze over.
Yeah, I'm having flashbacks to high school.
Okay, so think about it this way. For thousands of years, math was great at dealing with static things. Things that stayed still. You could calculate the area of a square, the volume of a cube. Easy.
Length times width.
Yeah.
Simple.
But what about things that are in motion? What is the exact speed of a cannonball at one specific instant in its flight? Its speed is constantly changing because of gravity and air resistance.
Right, it's not a single number.
And what about the area of an irregular shape, like the area under a parabolic curve on a graph? You can't just use length times width because the height is constantly changing. These were the two great unsolved problems of 17th century math.
Finding the instantaneous rate of change, the slope of a curve at a single point, and finding the area under a curve?
And everyone knew they were important problems, but they were treating them as separate. Leibniz, in a flash of insight, realized they were connected. And we actually have the date in his notebooks. On November 11th, 1675, he has his breakthrough.
He figures it out.
He realizes that these two operations, finding the slope, which he called differentiation, and finding the area, which he called integration, are inverses of each other. They undo one another. It's like multiplication and division.
The fundamental theorem of calculus.
That's it. It's the key that unlocks the entire system. But here's where Leibniz's genius goes in a different direction from his great rival, Isaac Newton, who was working on the same problem over in England.
The great showdown.
Newton thought about the problem like a physicist. He thought in terms of motion, what he called fluxions and fluents, the rates of flow. It was powerful, but his notation, the way he wrote it down, was messy and confusing.
And Leibniz was a philosopher and a logician.
He was obsessed with creating a perfect language. He wanted to create symbols that would make the thinking process almost automatic. So he developed a notation that was incredibly elegant and intuitive.
This is where we get the symbols we use today.
The very same. For integration, finding the area, he used an elongated letter SAFs for summa, the Latin word for sum, because you're summing up an infinite number of tiny rectangles under the curve.
Okay, that makes sense.
And for differentiation, finding the slope, he used the letter ds, as in dx for differentia, the Latin word for difference. It was a perfect symbolic language. It was a better user interface.
Newton built the engine, but Leibniz designed the dashboard and the steering wheel.
That is a perfect analogy. And because Leibniz's system was so much easier to use, it's the one that eventually took over the world. But he published it first in 1684. And Newton, who had developed his own version years earlier but had kept it secret, was not happy.
And this kicks off the dark cloud you mentioned, the priority dispute.
The nastiest, most vicious intellectual property dispute in the history of science. It gets ugly fast.
So Newton's allies start accusing Leibniz of plagiarism.
Yes. A man named John Keel, a follower of Newton, publishes an article in 1708, flat out accusing Leibniz of stealing the idea.
Is there any basis for this?
The only thin reed they had to hang on to was that Leibniz had visited London briefly in 1676 and had seen some of Newton's unpublished manuscripts. But modern historians who have studied the notebooks of both men are almost unanimous. They were independent discoveries. Their methods, their thinking, their notation, they're completely different.
But Newton wasn't interested in the truth. He wanted credit, and he was in a position of power.
Immense power. By this time, he's Sir Isaac Newton, the revered national hero, and he's the president of the Royal Society, the most prestigious scientific body in the world. He decides the society will form a committee to impartially investigate the charge of plagiarism.
Let me guess, the committee was not impartial.
The committee was stacked with Newton's staunchest allies. And the kicker is, we now know from historical analysis that Newton himself secretly wrote the committee's final report.
He was the judge in his own case.
He was the judge, jury, and executioner. The report, the Commercium Epistolicum, came out and officially declared Leibniz a thief and a fraud. It was a character assassination on an international scale.
That is just unbelievably petty from a mind like Newton's.
Newton was a brilliant, but also a deeply insecure and vindictive man. And this feud completely poisoned the rest of Leibniz's life. It tarnished his reputation, especially in the English-speaking world.
And it had real consequences for science, didn't it?
It did. It created a huge rift between British mathematicians and mathematicians on the continent. For nearly a century, British mathematicians, out of pure nationalistic loyalty, stuck with Newton's clunky, inferior notation, while the rest of Europe forged ahead using Leibniz's elegant system. They basically cut themselves off from major mathematical progress.
So Leibniz won the war in the long run, but he paid a heavy personal price.
A very heavy price. But even while this intellectual war is raging, his mind is already leaping ahead to the next century, to something else entirely. Section 4, the ancestor of the computer.
This is the part that just genuinely blows my mind, because we are still in the late 1600s, and this man is thinking about binary code.
It's astonishing. He became fascinated with the binary numeral system, base 2, the idea that you could represent any number at all using only two symbols, 1 and 0.
Which is the fundamental language of all digital computing today.
Every single thing your phone or computer does is, at its core, a manipulation of ones and zeros. Leibniz saw a deep, almost mystical elegance in this.
And he found inspiration for this in a very unexpected place.
Not from European mathematics. He found it through his correspondence with Jesuit missionaries in China. They sent him material about the I Ching, the ancient Chinese book of changes.
Which is a divination text, right? It uses these hexagrams made of solid and broken lines.
Exactly. And for centuries, people in the West who looked at it just saw mysticism. Leibniz looked at the 64 hexagrams, and he saw mathematics. He realized that if you treat a solid line as a 1 and a broken line as a 0, the hexagrams are a perfect representation of the binary numbers from 0 to 63.
He saw a binary counting system hidden in an ancient Chinese philosophical text.
Yes. He was convinced that the ancient Chinese sages had understood binary. And being Leibniz, he immediately gave it a profound theological meaning.
Of course he did.
For him, it was a perfect image of creation. The number 1 represented God, the ultimate unity, being. The number 0 represented the void, nothingness.
So God creating the universe out of nothing is symbolically represented by the way all numbers can be generated from just 1 and 0.
Ex nihilo. That's exactly how he saw it. It was a mathematical proof of a theological principle. But he didn't just stop at the philosophy. This is the key with Leibniz. He always wanted to build something. He was a theorist and a tinkerer.
He wanted to make a machine.
He envisioned a machine that could calculate using binary. In a manuscript from 1679, he sketched out an idea for a mechanical binary calculator that would use marbles.
Marbles.
Yeah, a system of gates and channels. A marble would fall, and a gate could be open or closed. If it falls through, that's a 1. If it's blocked, that's a 0. He even described using a moving platform with holes in it to control the gates.
Wait, holes? Like a punch card?
It's the essential logic of a punch card system. He's describing the basic mechanics of digital hardware 250 years before it became a reality.
Why didn't he build it?
The materials and manufacturing technology of the 17th century just weren't precise enough. It would have jammed constantly. He did, however, build a more conventional calculator that worked in base 10.
The stepped reckoner.
The stepped reckoner. It was a brass and steel marvel. It was the first mechanical calculator in history that could perform all 4 basic arithmetic functions: addition, subtraction, multiplication, and division. It was a masterpiece of engineering. But even that was just a small part of a much bigger dream he had.
The Ars Combinatoria, the great art.
Yes. This might be his most ambitious idea of all. He called it the Characteristica Universalis, the universal characteristic.
This is the idea that you could create a kind of alphabet of human thought.
Precisely. He believed that all complex human ideas were built up from a small number of simple primitive concepts. Like all words are built from 26 letters, or all numbers are built from primes.
So you could assign a symbol to animal, a symbol to rational, and if you combine them, you get the symbol for human.
Exactly. And if you could create this perfect logical language, it would revolutionize everything. He argued that human disputes in law, in politics, and philosophy were mostly caused by the ambiguity of our language and errors in our reasoning.
So if you could translate a political argument into this symbolic language,
you could solve it like a math problem. This led to his famous quote. He said if 2 philosophers were to disagree, they could simply say, calculemus, let us calculate.
they would just sit down, do the math, and one would be able to point out the other's logical error.
You see here, in step 3, you made an invalid deduction, and the argument would be over. Truth would be a matter of calculation.
That is profoundly optimistic.
It's hyper-rational.
Because it completely ignores human emotion, ideology, values, greed, all the things that actually drive conflict. You can't calculate your way out of a deeply held belief, even if it's illogical.
You can't. And that's the major criticism of this part of his philosophy. He had this unwavering faith in the power of reason to solve all problems. And that same rational optimism is at the heart of his most famous and most controversial philosophical doctrine.
Which brings us to section 5, the philosopher of optimism.
Yeah.
The best of all possible worlds.
The phrase that has been attached to him and often used to mock him for centuries,
Right.
it comes from his major work on the subject, the Theodicy. Theodicy.
Which is a term he coined, right? It means literally the justice of God.
Correct. And he's tackling the oldest, hardest problem in theology, the problem of evil.
Which is, simply put, if God is all-powerful, all-knowing, and all-good, why does evil exist? Why do children suffer? Why are there natural disasters?
It's a logical contradiction. If he's all good, he would want to prevent evil. If he's all-powerful, he would be able to prevent evil. Yet evil exists. So either God isn't all good, or he isn't all-powerful, or he doesn't exist.
And Leibniz says, no, there's a fourth option.
Says the premise is wrong.
Yeah.
His solution is, in a way, an engineering solution. He argues that before creating the universe, the mind of God contained an infinite number of possible worlds.
Every conceivable way the universe could have been set up.
Yes. A world without gravity, a world where humans have wings, a world with no free will, an infinite menu of options. But God, being supremely rational, is bound by the laws of logic. He can't create a contradiction, like a four-sided triangle. So God, in his infinite wisdom, surveyed all of these possible worlds and chose to create the one that was the best. But best doesn't mean perfect in the sense of having no suffering or evil.
So what does it mean?
It means the world that contains the optimal balance of simplicity in its laws and richness in its phenomena. It's the world with the most reality, the most variety, the most complexity that can exist under the simplest and most elegant set of physical laws.
So suffering and evil are somehow a necessary part of this optimal balance.
In his view, yes. He breaks evil down into three types. First, there's metaphysical evil, which is just the unavoidable imperfection of all created things. Only God can be perfect. Everything else, by definition, falls short.
Okay, that's just a given.
Then there's physical evil, pain, suffering, natural disasters, and moral evil, sin, cruelty. Leibniz argues that these are the necessary consequences of a greater good. For example, for humans to have free will, they must have the ability to choose evil. A world of robots who are programmed to always do good might have no sin, but it would also have no genuine love or courage or virtue.
So this is the best possible world. Not because it's pleasant, but because it's the most meaningful or the most complex.
It has the richest compossibilities, as he put it. The different elements are compatible in the most fruitful way.
Mm-hmm.
But you can see how this could come across as very cold and abstract to someone who's actually suffering.
And that's exactly what his critics seized on, most famously Voltaire.
Voltaire absolutely savaged him for this. The Great Lisbon earthquake of 1755 happens, kills tens of thousands of people. And Voltaire is horrified by philosophers who are trying to explain it away. So he writes his satirical novel Candide,
Featuring Dr. Pangloss,
whose name literally means all-tongue. He's this ridiculous caricature of Leibniz who wanders through a world of unending horror war, disease, torture, constantly repeating the mantra, all is for the best in this, the best of all possible worlds.
And it makes the philosophy look absurd.
It does. It was a brilliant piece of mockery. Now, to be fair to Leibniz, he was never saying, don't worry, be happy. He was making a metaphysical argument that the universe is fundamentally rational and ordered, not chaotic and meaningless. But it's an argument that's very hard to hear when you're in pain.
And this faith in a deeply ordered, rational universe, it leads him to his wildest, most abstract creation. Section 6, monads, space, and time.
Okay, buckle up. This is where we go into the deep end of the metaphysical pool, the monadology.
I have tried to wrap my head around this, and it is difficult. He claims the universe is ultimately composed of these things called monads. Are they like atoms?
That's the first thing everyone thinks, but no, they are fundamentally different.
Hmm?
An atom, for a physicist, is a physical object. It has a size, a shape, it occupies a piece of space.
Right.
Leibniz approaches this with pure logic. He says anything that is extended in space, no matter how small, can be divided. You can cut it in half. If you can cut it in half, it's made of parts. And if it's made of parts, it can't be the ultimate simple substance.
So you have to get to something that has no parts, something indivisible.
Exactly. But a physical point with no size is nothing. So he concludes that the fundamental building blocks of reality can't be physical at all. They must be non-physical. They must be something more like souls.
The entire universe is made of an infinite number of tiny souls.
That's essentially it. He calls them monads. They are simple, indivisible, eternal centers of force or perception. Everything, you, me, this table, a rock, a star, is a colony or an aggregate of these monads.
Okay. That's already pretty strange, but then it gets stranger.
Then it gets much stranger. He says that each monad is completely unique. Each one perceives the entire universe, but from its own unique perspective. And this is the famous part, monads have no windows.
What on earth does that mean?
It means they cannot actually interact with each other. Nothing can pass from one monad to another. They can't cause anything to happen in another monad.
Wait, stop. That makes no sense. If I push this table, my hand, which is made of monads, interacts with the table, which is made of monads, and the table moves, that's cause and effect.
Leibniz says that is an illusion, a very compelling illusion, but an illusion nonetheless.
So how does he explain it?
He explains it with his doctrine of pre-established harmony. This is his solution to the intractable mind-body problem that plagued philosophers like Descartes.
The problem of how a non-physical mind can move a physical body.
Right. Leibniz says they don't. He uses an analogy. Imagine you have two perfect clocks built by a master clockmaker. You set them to the exact same time and hang them on the wall side by side.
Okay.
The first clock strikes noon. At the exact same instant, the second clock strikes noon. Does the first clock cause the second clock to strike?
No, of course not. They're just perfectly synchronized.
Exactly. Leibniz says the entire universe is like that. God, the master clockmaker, created all the monads and, at the moment of creation, programmed each one with a complete script of its entire existence.
So my mind monads were pre-programmed to decide to push the table at this exact moment. And the table monads were pre-programmed to move away at that exact same moment.
Precisely. They are running in perfect pre-established harmony, without ever actually influencing each other. It's a universe of infinite, parallel, synchronized processes.
That is one of the most bizarre and elaborate philosophical systems I've ever heard.
It is. It's a consequence of taking pure rationalism to its absolute limit. But what's fascinating is that while he's developing these very strange metaphysical ideas, he's also having another major debate with Newton, a debate about the nature of space and time. And on this one, history has proven Leibniz right.
This is the argument about absolute versus relative space.
Yes. For Newton, space was like a giant, invisible, empty box, an absolute container. He said if you took everything out of the universe, all the stars, planets, everything, the empty box of space and the ticking clock of absolute time would still exist, unchanging.
It's the stage, and the actors are optional.
A perfect way to put it. Leibniz thought this was philosophically absurd. He argued that space and time are not things in themselves, they're relational.
What does that mean, relational?
He said that space is simply the order of coexistences, is the set of all the distance relationships between objects. This thing is next to that thing and far from that other thing. If there are no objects, there are no relationships, and therefore no space.
So no actors, no stage?
Exactly. And time, he said, is the order of successions. It's the relationship between events. This happened before that, which happened before that other thing. No events, no time.
And for 200 years, the scientific consensus was that Newton was right.
Overwhelmingly. Until a clerk in the Swiss patent office named Albert Einstein came along.
With his theory of relativity?
Einstein's theory of general relativity describes gravity as the warping of space-time by mass and energy. Space-time is not a static background. Its very shape is determined by the matter within it. It's a fundamentally relational concept. Einstein himself was a great admirer of Leibniz's thought on this, and explicitly sided with him against Newton.
So Leibniz had the correct physical intuition 2 centuries before the mathematics existed to prove it.
Once again, correct, but way ahead of his time. And it's important to remember, he wasn't just a thinker. He was always trying to apply these ideas. Section 7. The doer engineering, science, and projects.
Right, he's not just locked in a room writing about monads. He has a day job, and he takes it seriously.
Very seriously. For a large part of his career, he worked for the House of Brunswick in Hanover. And one of their main sources of wealth was a series of silver mines in the nearby Harz Mountains.
And these mines had a problem.
A chronic, persistent problem. They kept flooding. The deeper they dug, the more groundwater would seep in, making it impossible to work.
So Leibniz puts on his engineer's hat.
He does. He dedicates almost 5 years of his life, from about 1680 to 1685, to solving this problem. He's not just drawing up plans, he's down in the mines, in the dark and the mud, supervising. He designs an ambitious new system to pump the water out using wind power.
Windmill.
Not just any windmills. He designed a new type of vertical axis windmill and a series of linked pumps and propellers to lift the water out of the shafts. It was a very complex, very innovative piece of engineering.
And did it work?
In the end,
No.
it was a failure.
Why? What went wrong?
A combination of things. The technology was pushing the limits of the materials available. But the biggest problem was human. The miners and the mine administrators were deeply skeptical of this court philosopher coming in and telling them how to do their jobs. They actively resisted him, and according to his letters, they may have even sabotaged the equipment.
A classic case of innovation clashing with entrenched interests.
Yes, he finally had to abandon the project, much to his frustration and the annoyance of his employers.
Yeah.
But he just moved on to the next thing. His mind never stopped. He was making contributions in fields that didn't even really exist yet.
Like psychology.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
He essentially anticipates the concept of the subconscious mind. He wrote about what he called petites perceptions, or small perceptions.
What were those?
He used a brilliant analogy. Imagine you were standing by the ocean. You hear the roar of the waves. That sound, he argued, is composed of the sound of countless individual water droplets crashing. You are not consciously aware of the sound of any single droplet.
Right, it's below the threshold of my perception.
But your mind is still processing them. Those are the petites perceptions. And when enough of them accumulate, they cross a threshold and enter your conscious awareness as the roar of the sea. That conscious awareness he called apperception.
So he's saying we're constantly being influenced by stimuli that we aren't consciously aware of. That's a foundational idea of modern psychology.
150 years before Freud, he was also a pioneering geologist. In a work called Protogaea, he proposed that the Earth was once a molten ball of fire.
Which was a pretty radical idea at the time.
Hugely radical. The biblical account of creation was still the dominant model. He also correctly identified fossils as the remains of ancient living creatures, and argued that by studying rock strata, you could read the history of the Earth. He was laying the groundwork for modern geology.
And all this while doing his actual day job, which for many years was being a librarian.
And he revolutionized that too. As the librarian for the Ducal Library in Wolfenbüttel, one of the best in Europe, he wasn't just a caretaker. He created one of the first alphabetical author catalogs. He argued a library's purpose was to be a tool for research, not a dusty museum for the Duke to show off.
He wanted to make the information accessible.
He even proposed that publishers should be required to create abstracts, short summaries of all new books published each year. He wanted to create a searchable database of human knowledge.
He's inventing Google Scholar in the 1690s.
It's the same impulse that drove his Characteristica Universalis, the desire to organize, to systematize, to make all knowledge accessible and calculable.
So when you stack it all up, calculus, binary, physics, philosophy, engineering, psychology, geology, library science, this man's resume is just staggering. He should have been the most celebrated intellectual in Europe. He should have died rich and famous.
He should have. But that is not what happened. And the story of his final years is deeply tragic. Section 8. The Lonely End in Hanover.
It all comes down to a history project, doesn't it?
It does. His primary official duty for his employers, the House of Brunswick, was to serve as their historian. They commissioned him to write a grand history of their family line, the House of Guelph.
Basically a vanity project to prove their ancient and noble lineage.
Exactly. Prove we're descended from Charlemagne. For any normal court historian, this would be a straightforward job of, some creative genealogy. But this was Leibniz.
He couldn't just do a simple job.
He couldn't. He decided he had to do it properly. He had to write the definitive, most rigorously researched history ever produced. He started his research not with the recent dukes, but in the early Middle Ages. He traveled all over Europe to archives in Austria, in Italy, digging up ancient manuscripts.
He's treating it like a massive scientific undertaking.
He is. And the project just balloons. Decades go by. And his employers, the electors of Hanover, are getting more and more annoyed. They just want the book. They keep writing him letters, asking about his dilatoriness.
They think he's slacking off. They don't appreciate that he's also, inventing modern science on the side.
They don't care about his monads or his calculating machines. They want their family history.
Yeah.
And this all comes to a head in 1714.
This is the big political moment.
The biggest. Through a series of dynastic and political events, which Leibniz actually helped facilitate, his boss, the elector George Louis of Hanover, is named the heir to the British throne. Queen Anne of Great Britain dies, and he becomes King George III.
So the whole Hanoverian court is about to pack up and move to London, the biggest, richest city in the world.
It's the ultimate promotion. And Leibniz, who has served this family faithfully for nearly 40 years, surely expects to go with them. He expects a prestigious position at the British court.
But the new king has other ideas.
King George III forbids Leibniz from coming to London.
He just leaves him behind. Wow.
Two main reasons. The official reason was the unfinished history book. The king basically tells him, you are not to come to London until you have finished your work. It was a punishment for his perceived laziness.
And the unofficial reason?
The unofficial reason was Isaac Newton. By 1714, Sir Isaac Newton is a god in London. He's the president of the Royal Society, master of the Mint, the nation's greatest scientific icon, and he loathes Leibniz. For King George, a brand new German-speaking king who was already unpopular with some of his new subjects, bringing his pet philosopher Newton's mortal enemy to London would have been a political disaster.
So Leibniz was sacrificed for political convenience.
He was left behind in the provincial backwater of Hanover while the court he had served his whole life moved on without him. It must have been utterly devastating.
And he dies there not long after.
He dies 2 years later, in 1716, at the age of 70. And the circumstances of his death are just so sad. He'd been suffering from gout. He was increasingly isolated.
It was a funeral.
The funeral was a disgrace. He was so out of favor with the court that no one attended. No official representatives. The Royal Society in London, which he should have been a member of, completely ignored his passing. The Berlin Academy of Sciences, which he himself had founded and served as president for, didn't even mention it.
So who was there?
Only his personal secretary. One man walked behind the coffin. He was buried in an unmarked grave, which remained that way for more than 50 years. A man who'd given the world so much was treated as if he was nothing.
It's a tragic end. You have to wonder, if he had just been a specialist, if he had only done calculus or only done philosophy, would he have been better understood and celebrated in his own time?
I think it's very likely. He was a man of so many talents that he didn't fit neatly into any box. People couldn't see the whole picture.
Yeah.
It took centuries for us to piece together the true scale of his contributions.
So let's try to do that. As we wrap up here in the outro, how do we synthesize this legacy? What's the final score on Leibniz?
The score is that he's everywhere. His binary logic is the foundation of the digital world. His calculus is the language of science and engineering. His physics, with the idea of the relativity of space and time, was a crucial step on the road to Einstein.
He laid the conceptual groundwork for computer science, for artificial intelligence, for modern psychology, for geology.
It's this incredible breadth. He really was the last person who could, with some justification, claim to have a grasp of the totality of human knowledge before it fractured into a million specialized fields. He was the end of an era.
But there's that dream of his that still haunts us. The calculemus. Let us calculate.
The dream of the rational world.
And that's the final thought I want to leave you with. Leibniz genuinely believed that if we could perfect our language and our logic, we could resolve our deepest disputes as easily as solving a math problem. We could literally debug human society.
A world without misunderstanding. A world without irrational conflict.
And today, we have the tools he dreamed of. We have computers that can calculate billions of times faster than he could have imagined. We have access to more information than ever before, and yet we seem to be more polarized, more divided, more trapped in our conflicting narratives than ever.
We have the hardware, but we don't seem to have the right software.
So here's the question. Was Leibniz's dream just a naive, rationalist fantasy? Or have we just not figured out how to use his legacy properly yet? Is the problem that a universal language is impossible, or is the problem, as it always has been, simply us?
That's calculation we're still trying to run.
And a deep dive for another day. Thank you for joining us for this look into the mind of a true universal genius.
My pleasure. It was a fascinating journey.
We'll see you next time.